Well, good morning, good afternoon, and hello, Texas FFA members. The Texas FFA Foundation is proud to bring a series of leadership development opportunities prior to the convention, and we want you to tune in for the convention as well. But as we lead up to convention, we thought it would be great to get people together, share some expert content, some expert insights, and so that's what we're doing. And we're going to kick it off here with this series today, which is called Keys to Effective Speaking. So we've got some folks here on the phone that represent business and industry who have careers where they've heard from many speakers, both in organizational settings, professional settings. Thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of gain some of their insights. So we have Marcus Hill and Karissa Jones. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's let ladies go first. Karissa, if you don't mind. Karissa, introduce yourself.
Very good. Well, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Hello, Texas FFA. As Aaron said, my name is Karissa Jones. I am our Western Region Sales Manager for BASF. I work underneath our agricultural umbrella, focused on the turf and ornamental industry, so think golf courses, greenhouse, and nursery. I manage a sales team of 9 reps that go from Ohio all the way to Hawaii.
Wow.
Howdy, everybody. My name is Marcus Hill. I joined the FFA in 1962. Yes, I'm a senior citizen here. I was state FFA president in 1966. It's good to visit with y'all.
So let's talk about keys to effective speaking. What do y'all think makes a great speaker? I mean, what is it when we use that term, great speaker or effective speaker? What are some of those qualities that at the end of a presentation we walk away and say, that was really good?
Well, I have to say, I like this topic, Aaron, a lot. As mentioned, the sales manager, so have the opportunity to speak a lot, whether it's to my team or coaching my team to speak in front of folks as well. And what really comes to mind on those that resonate, even as a person myself listening, is be yourself. Is the person needs to be themselves. They can't be anyone that they can't, because it comes off fake. And you really don't want that to be the case at the end of the day.
I would just have to say ditto to that. I remember years ago, the number one fear of executives in America, the number one fear wasn't the market, wasn't sales, wasn't the board of directors. It was public speaking or speaking in public. Now, the FFA has a reputation of providing good speakers and turning out good speakers. And there's a reason. Because they have the experience, because whether it be chapter conducting or saying the creed, we start out with a blue and goal of communicating and learn to communicate and learn to share. I usually start with the 3 S's in public speaking. It's stand up, speak up, and shut up. Kind of, if you think about that, we're loud. I'm loud. A lot of the good speakers over history were loud. And I was born in the 40s. And why were we loud? When did we speak more loudly? There were no microphones. There were no PA systems back then. If you look at Billy Graham, if you look at FDR, if you look at even John Kennedy, we all exuded more sound and were a little louder. And I think that's part of it. I think today, though, it's more conversational. There's not as much radio voice, but we always started out with stand up, speak up, and shut up.
I think that's good. I would like to kind of piggyback on those if y'all don't mind me jumping in here with you. I do agree, Karissa. I think one of the things that we need to be careful of if we're a student out there and we're looking to be an effective speaker is it's great to listen to other speakers, but try to develop your own voice. Be yourself. And also, when we say be yourself, when we're sitting here talking like Marcus and Karissa and I are today, that ought to sound about what we sound like we're on the stage speaking. And I think a lot of times students go from this conversational style and they get on stage and they try to put on an air, or they use a cadence, or they do something that's a little bit different than the way that they communicate one-on-one. One of the things that I always tell students is consistency creates credibility. And consistency creates credibility not only in what we do as leaders, but it's also the way that we present ourselves. So I would say that one of the keys to effective speaking and presentation is to use your own voice. As Marcus said, I remember the old days of the radio voice, where FFA members would get up and they'd put on this voice like this. And then you'd talk to them in general, and you're like, well, that's not the same voice that I just heard on stage. So where's the credibility? So use your own voice, be credible, be consistent. I say be clear, concise. I love that what Marcus said about stand up, speak out, and then sit down. Another one that I heard is called the 3 E's of a presentation: encourage, entertain, and educate. But all of these kind of fit the mold of what we're getting started here saying. What would be, from y'all's perspective, when you think of great speakers, you named a couple, Marcus, who would they be, and what is it about their style? And I think we could all say that we've known speakers that have more of a subtle style, and then we know speakers that have more of a Zig Ziglar style. But what would be some examples that y'all might share of speakers maybe that you've heard in your professional careers, Marcus, and then maybe, Karissa, and then maybe some that you've heard in organizational settings?
I've got 4 to share, but let me share a story before we share those 4 speakers that I've got in mind. I took the Dale Carnegie course when I was in high school, and the guy was good, and there were about 12 of us, and we all sat at a long table, and everybody's scared. This is in the 60s. And back then, public speaking was something, you sweated through your shirt, you sweated through your jacket even then. But he set us at the table, and he said, well, we've got one more, we're waiting. While we're waiting, go ahead and tell us your name and what you do. So we went around the table and everybody said their name. I said, I'm Marcus Hill. I worked at KSST, the radio station at the time. And so we go around and he smiled and he says, you've just made your public speech. Why are you scared? What's the difference? You said your name, and what if you said more? Then he said, now stand up and say that again, and you will have made your second public speech. So he took away the fear. It's just like all you're doing is sharing your thoughts. Let me run back on some of the best speeches I've ever heard, and we'll talk a little bit about why. One of the best speeches ever was Kobe Shorter when he spoke at the State Fair of Texas Honor Awards banquet. He was so good, and he connected to the audience, and he talked about the relationship among parents and their kids. And that's who was there, mothers and daddies with their 4-H and FFA and FCCLA kids. Everybody in that room stood in line to shake hands with him when he got through. Another one of the best speeches, and he's sitting here, and it was Aaron Alejandro, who talked about the power of choice. This was what, Aaron, 20 years ago to the home ec teachers of Texas. He talked about the power of choice and how to handle their students and what they do. One of the most effective speeches. Bruce Cobb spoke at the Merit FFA banquet one time and talked about born leaders. There are no born leaders. We're all born broken, naked, the same, and how you develop that. And one of the better ones recently, Donald Brown spoke to the Tall group about estate planning. Now, what could be more boring than estate planning? But he made it related to them, and he talked about somebody's going to inherit what you've got or don't have, and you're going to inherit. And so those are 4 speeches, but all of them related to the audience very well.
I'm going to take it, actually, right, Marcus, I'm going to add on to what you were talking about. I'm going to speak in terms of the industry side and just in terms of involvement and what really resonated with me when I was working on public speaking. As my marketing director when I was in marketing in the previous role to this one. And it really goes along with, Marcus, exactly what you just did, is you told the story. And that was going to be one of the other points, Aaron, that I was going to mention in terms of effective speaking, is telling a story. Being able to relate to the audience. Not only are you building rapport and credibility for yourself, but you're also telling a story which someone can relate to. And we're all human, right? And so when you can tie it to something else, 1, it'll resonate, and 2, it'll have a bigger impact.
One of the examples that I like to use, and I'm going to use this from a historical perspective, so I want everybody to be very clear the perspective that I'm about to use this. I think that probably one of the greatest communicators of all times was Jesus Christ. And the reason I say that he was such an effective communicator is because it didn't matter who the audience was. His message would meet you wherever you were at. If you were a child, you got it. kind of, Marcus, what you were saying. If you were a business person, you got it. If you were a religious leader, you got it. The message met you where you were at. And Karissa, to your point, when we think about keys to effective speaking, I know that I like a good speaker that has good analogies and stories.
Yeah.
I like a good speaker that uses stats and facts. Because if you think about the audiences that we've got people in there that are young, that are just getting started. We've got parents with a little bit more experience, but we could have professionals like you guys in the room, and you've got to have a message that meets them. So to both of y'all's points, I would say that one of the keys to effective speaking is to develop a presentation that meets the audience where they are. And that includes stories, analogies, facts, and stats. And y'all have just articulated that beautifully. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that goes back to, Aaron, a lot of what I work with my team on in terms of them being in front of their customers and through the sales process. Of everyone learns a little bit differently, and everyone's going to relate differently to your point about the stats. Some those that like the data piece, some that are going to appeal to the emotion side of things and being able to relate that way, and some that are very vibrant. And also keep in mind those that may not like that, out the door, loud type of a personality. So being able to entertain all 4 different areas is important as well.
Very good.
Let's talk about what makes a great presentation, and we've gone over it. It's content and connection to the audience. What do they want to hear? I thought of a quick example. I was speaking to the Ag Ed block at San Marcos. As a matter of fact, it was one that George Strait was in, a true story. And I gave a rip-roaring FFA motivational speech, and they were courteous and kind of applause. And Cleveland Montgomery spoke, and he was with the Texas Department of Agriculture. And he spoke about jobs and how to interview and how to approach your company. And I mean, they went wild, and everybody lined up to meet with him afterwards. So you got to connect with the audience. What are they wanting to hear? And they were wanting to hear about jobs on that particular day.
Oh, that's excellent. Marcus, you're bringing up a lot of great memories, and I just thought the world of Kleeman. You're absolutely right. The presentation doesn't have to be, like we said, a Ziegler presentation. It can be a very soft-spoken presentation, but it's done in such a way that it meets the audience. It's what they want to hear, like Marcus just said. It's what they want to hear, what's important to them. I think maybe another concept here that we ought to jump into just for a second is the setup. How do you set up a speech? A lot of times students say, well, I have a hard time writing. And I always like to share the story of Leon Uris, who wrote some of the greatest best-selling books in the world. And Leon Uris failed high school English 3 years in a row. And he was quoted saying, I'm glad English has nothing to do with writing. And he's absolutely right. Writing is the process of getting your thoughts on paper. We can go back and organize them. And I think a lot of times students and presenters stress out over trying to set their speech up. And you really don't need to do that. You need to just kind of let your thoughts flow and capture them on paper. But what are y'all's thoughts? And then I'll come back and I'll share mine. But what are y'all's thoughts on how to prepare and set up a presentation?
2 major things come to mind, Aaron. One is, what is your end goal? Keeping the end in mind and work your way backwards to your point of being able to organize your points. And number 2 is, oh dang it, I just lost what it was. Oh, tell them again, and tell them one more time.
Correct. That's
absolutely good. Repetition, and repetition. But know your subject. It's hard to fake people. I could talk on insurance, but I couldn't talk on quantum physics. So know what you're talking about, know who the audience, know what they want to hear. I want us to talk about number 2. How long should a presentation be? Because this has always aggravated me when people drone on and on and on, and you've got to go to the bathroom or it's time for lunch. I remember that psychologically, the attention span of the average adult is 20 minutes. I've watched our pastor, and we're Zooming at church, but he always stops in less than 20 minutes. When I was growing up over in East Texas, hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, not just a sermon, but any speech, the speakers at banquet, my speeches in FFA used to be 30, 40, 50 minutes. I tell you one of the best, and that's John Sharp, the chancellor at A&M. He used to give those 45 minutes to an hour speeches. You watch John Sharp now, 12 to 15 minutes. Say it, get it over with, and move along and give room for somebody else. And the other thing, and I always say, stop. If they tell you 30 minutes, stop in 25. It's always better to leave a little or leave them wanting some more. What do you think, Karissa?
You're spot on, Marcus, spot on. And opportunity to ask questions, right? I mean, that's part of also the interaction part that we talked about previously, about being able to connect and interact with the audience. And it'd be more memorable for them if you allow those opportunities to ask questions.
We must have been sharing notes, Marcus, because right here at the very end, my last point was take some time, but give some back. And I think that that's just a good rule to follow, and that, be respectful of other people's time. And also know that I think when you're setting up a presentation, think about ways to get people's attention. I like to start off with a question. What do y'all think about this? Or what do you know about this? Because immediately people have to engage. Their mind has to get going. And then, like you said, Karissa, I always say it's really easy to write a speech. Get you 5 pieces of paper. On one, write the introduction. On the next 3, write point 1, 2, 3, and then write a conclusion. And then you go back and do exactly what you said. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them.
Let's do a little bit on number 4. It'd be number 3. How to handle challenge. I wanted to share this one because it was a big group. I won't say who it was, but it was over in Dallas, and they'd had a 2-hour happy hour. And there was a guy right on the front, and he was mouthing off and making fun and kidding me. And how do you handle that? Because they couldn't hear him in the back. And finally, I said, "Hey, he's funnier than I am." And they cracked up, and he shut up. But there was another time when, again, somebody had been drinking after a happy hour, and he was rude. He was obnoxious. And finally, I said, "Sir, why don't you come up here to the microphone so everybody can hear you?" But y'all all had a heckler or something. How do you handle it?
That's, Marcus, you would have handled it exactly the way I would have, or I would call him out. "Well, sir, what is your opinion on this?" And just really call attention to him or her in that particular situation, or ask them to come up on stage, right? What better way than, "Hey, why don't you come join me up here on stage and let's walk through this together."
We don't have enough time for all the stories that I could share of different things that have happened. But there have been those instances where there are people in the audience that are not as engaged as everybody else, and they decide that they're going to let their inside thoughts become outside thoughts. And when they do, they become a distraction. And, I think it's a lot like life. I think we have to decide whether or not we're going to react or respond. If we went to the doctor and they gave us some medicine and said, "No, your body's reacting to this," that's not good. We've got to learn how to respond to those things. And I think a good speaker knows how to respond. And sometimes that's humor, as Marcus said. Other times it may just be simply like I've shared with one of them one time. I said, "I'm sorry, I'm up here right now trying to share. I can't hear you, but when I get done, I can meet you, and I'd love to hear what you have to say." But
that's a good one.
Just to keep it smooth and whatever you, okay, so here's a tip for FFA members. Whatever you do, don't really engage with somebody, because at the point that you engage, you have lost. You have lost. You've given control to the other person. So try to be above that. That's what we've tried to create you to do as leaders in the Texas FFA, is to be above that. What other thoughts do y'all have on public speaking, Marcus and Karissa?
I would have to say one area that we probably ought to touch on as well, is very important, is your appearance. How you are standing on the stage, and or your nonverbals, as I like to call them. Because a lot can be said by your nonverbals. It's not always what you say, it's what you don't say that really says the message, right? Are you being genuine in your message? Are you really passionate about what you're talking about? Are you really engaged with the audience, or are you just saying words? And that comes anywhere from your body language. It's okay. I tend to talk with my hands as I'm doing right now, right? Don't be too distracted when you're doing it, but that also shows the engagement and the passion behind what you're doing. Also having the eye contact, making sure that you're making eye contact with people, whether it's the person in the front row or thinking about that person that's all the way in the back if you're in a big audience type situation. And don't just stand still. That can also be just as distracting as someone who's pacing the floor, right? Because they're going to be more worried about you pacing and when you're going to turn around than what words are coming out of your mouth. But you also want it to be very natural. It goes back to what I said. Be yourself. Be yourself.
Let me share the notes that I wrote on number 4, 3 tips to being an effective speaker. First one I put is ask questions, because that gets them engaged. What do you want to talk about today? What do you think about? How many are from here? Where y'all from, etc. That gets them thinking. Secondly, I said stand up, speak up, and shut up, and that's about your presentation. Of course, the magic is if you've got on a blue corduroy jacket, that's a pretty special way to dress anyway. I've talked about humor. I heard Ross Perot Jr. make a speech recently. He didn't have a humor. He came in and said, I'll take questions afterwards, but I'd like to share. But I need nothing. How's mom and them? What's going on? I've always used humor. I think most FFA people do use humor. Make sure it's self-deprecating first. You got to be careful, and maybe that's why humor is not as popular as it used to be, I guess, because somebody might be offended. Make your speech shorter than expected. That makes you tighten it up. Make sure you know your subject. Make sure you represent FFA well.
Wow. That was the whole presentation right there. Marcus put it all on the button. I will say this about public speaking. Just as a personal testimony, Marcus knows that, I should have never been on a stage. I should have never been given a speech, but I've been given the whole United States. I've now been in every state in the United States except for Alaska. And people ask me to come and make presentations, and what they're interested in is my brand. It's what do I believe? What is my passion? What is my brand? And from coast to coast, everybody knows that I want to talk about agriculture, youth, and leadership. That's what I want to talk about. And I've always been told that nobody can argue with your testimony. Marcus, you said it earlier, Karissa. You guys are experts. Nobody knows Karissa's story like Karissa. Nobody knows Marcus's story like Marcus. So when you get up and you share your story and you share your testimony and you tie that to whatever the topic is, it's very difficult for somebody to say, well, that didn't happen to you. Well, of course it did. That's your testimony. And the key thing about that testimony is, and Marcus, you used a great example a while ago. I've used that same example, that if you get up and say your name, you're a public speaker. Who knows you better than you? God makes no junk. God sponsors no flops. We were designed for greatness. There's nobody else like us. The DNA is unique. All you got to do is get up and say, let me show you what God gave me. Here I am. Here's my story. And if you keep it simple like that, it takes a lot of pressure off, I think, in preparing a presentation.
I'm always very proud when those young people get up to speak. There's no more patriotic organization than FFA. There's no more work ethic. There's no more people that know the profit motive and the incentive and motivation than the guys and gals who wear the blue and gold. So thank you for allowing us to share today.
Yeah. And I can say from a hiring manager's perspective is the FFA members always stand out.
Marcus, I'm gonna wrap this up with the comment that you made earlier. It was actually Psychology Today magazine at one time. They did a series of what do Americans fear the most, and public speaking actually ranked above dying. People are scared to death to get up and speak. So to wrap this up, if you're a Texas FFA member and you're watching this right now, I want you to think about this. In the state of Texas right now, there's over 1,100 school districts. There's a lot of seniors graduating. They're going to be looking for scholarships. They're going to be looking for jobs. What separates you from them? Maybe they were in UIL. Maybe they did something else. So what separates you from them? What is your competitive edge? And I would tell you that people who can stand up and communicate orally with their voice and people who can communicate in the written word will have a competitive edge. So one of the reasons I thought it was important that we do this little segment on keys to effective speaking is because Marcus Hill and AgWorkers, Karissa and BASF, they believe in you Texas FFA members and they want you to have a competitive edge. And that's why we're spending a little bit of time with you this afternoon. So with that, I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to Karissa Jones, BASF, Marcus Hill with AgWorkers. Thank you so much for all that y'all have done for the students of Texas. I tell people all the time, Texas is a better place to live, work, and raise our families because of the fuel that you folks provide us. So thank you so much for what you do. Hey, Texas FFA members, be sure to tune in for the 92nd Annual Texas FFA Convention. Strive for greatness. Strive to be great. We know you are. Hey, while you're at convention, be sure to check out the Foundation's virtual scavenger hunt. We're going to be giving away a $1,000 award scholarship every day from the students who get all of the scavenger hunt questions correct. So be sure to take a chance. Go to mytexasffa.org. Good luck.